Hi, good morning, wherever you are in the world, or good afternoon, good evening. I'm Cheryl, and I just wanted to share with you my sketchbook from a recent trip to Norfolk Island. I know I love looking through people's sketchbooks, and you don't often get the chance if you don't live close or sketch out with them. So just wanted to show you what I was working on the island. I was also teaching a workshop, so I didn't get as much time, to sketch out as what I would if I was travelling solo or travelling just with a group of sketchers, sketching every day. So this is done a little bit on site, a little bit in my room in the evenings, and some once I came home, because I always make a sketchbook too big, too many pages, and I want it to be just Norfolk Island. So I'm filling it from home at the moment in the evenings, a little bit of extra sketching, and really enjoying exploring those photos and thinking about what mediums to use. So I will skip over to the other camera. Okay, so I made this sketchbook just before I left, and it's just a leather wrapped sketchbook, but I did learn a difficult mistake, that this button hanging as my clasp was a little bit in the road, because often I would want to put my palette here beside me, so it's uneven, or if I folded it back so that the leather didn't get wet, it was underneath me. So that's lesson number one. I wouldn't do a button like that again. The leather also impacted the paper on the first page. This was leather that I had bought just from a shoemaker or a cobbler in Arles on a recent trip, so it's not treated specifically to be used for this purpose. So it had left a coating on this front page, and I did this on the first day that I arrived, just plopping myself in the sun. So I was trying to work very quickly, there was no shade, and it was kind of repelling the paint, but it gave it a little bit of an interesting texture. I did have to come back and use some pencil on it afterwards, just because there was lots and lots of white gaps. I had a little swim down Emily Bay, and I had done this sketch there just really quickly, but I really felt like I didn't capture the top. I started here and was putting the detail of the rocks in before making sure I could fit my whole tree on, and that's something that I often have a failing in. I draw bigger than I intend and then run out of space. So that's why then these people came and sat in front of me on this picnic table, and I thought, why don't I just put another little sketch there, because I really wanted to indicate that this tree that's known as lone pine bends back at the top, where this sketch, I felt like it looks like I've painted the top of the tree, even though I haven't, and intended for it to look like it was coming off the top. I discovered this gorgeous little tree-lined street lined with fig trees, and they were just hundreds of years old and quite stunning. So I did a little sketch of the tree. I started with the pen, just your normal fountain pen with waterproof ink, and then I added some colour, and then I added some more pen, and I did have the intention to add some foliage and things, but I got to this stage and just quite liked it and wanted to stop. I was reading a book at the time that was a poetry book about trees, and so I added a section of a poem in here as my text for the day, for that day. Banana trees were all over Norfolk Island, and quite prevalent. So I had been quite fascinated with the interplay of warm and cool colour in the leaves. So often you see that beautiful shiny cerulean blue. So I had drawn up this little study while I was waiting for dinner one night at the lavender farm, where there's also a crop of trees, a crop of banana trees along there. And then my class arrived, and our first session we were talking about greens and mixing greens, and just a little tester study of Norfolk pine, so that we would look at the leaves and the direction of growth of their branches. Emily Bay, one day after class, we ducked down for a quick swim, and then decided we would do a very fast sketch before we went back to our rooms to get ready for dinner. So I had drawn this just on site, sitting on the beach with this sepia Faber-Castell pen that I love, But what I did realise, even at the time as I was doing it, was that it went through to my following page. This craft paper was a little bit thinner than what I'm used to. So that was a little bit disappointing, and I knew I couldn't really paint on this paper. It doesn't work very well for paint. So I'd use some colour pencil later back in the room on the craft paper side and a little bit of paint just here. What I like to do sometimes to fill a page is pick up some odds and ends that fall from the trees that I might be drawing. And I had intended actually to do that back on the fig tree page. I was going to put some seed pods and things here, but then I added the poem. So here are some of the bits and pieces that fall from the Norfolk pines, the pine needles. This little Tullamore Dew bottle was on a table at a restaurant that we went to, and it just reminded me of my youth. I think my mum and dad used to drink or buy Tullamore Dew, and while this isn't the exact Tullamore Dew bottle, there was one of that on a different table, and this was on the table that I was on. So I did take a photo of that at the time. We were having morning tea, and I sketched it later back in my room. Along with these, they were the little seed pods from the fig tree that I had collected at a later date. And again, this is colour pencil mostly on the craft paper. And I'd also picked up a little bit of this old man's beard because it's quite fascinating. But again, this craft paper being a little bit thinner, it was a lesson in using dry glue rather than wet glue. You know, I should have just used glue stick to glue my tickets in so that the glue didn't come right through the page. I'll often add tickets and information about things that I've done on a trip. This is another piece of, I don't think it's the same as the old man's beard, but like an air plant that grows on a lot of the trees. We got to a location early one day before the morning tea and just sketched for an hour in the gardens close by. So these were just some little plant studies of what I could see. Instead of writing about the day, I wrote little notes to myself about the stroppy leaves or the colour, just something that had grabbed me about the plant. This one, it was the velvety leaves with the deep veins. Sometimes it's difficult to think of text that you want to add to your page, so you know, it's trying to come up with a variety of things for different pages so that your sketchbook is interesting. This day we went to a restaurant that hasn't reopened since COVID called Dino's. We were lucky enough to be invited to paint on their property, which had lots of interesting mosaic things. So the pizza oven had mosaic tiles. There was like an old water tank with mosaics around it. So I did a quick demo with the window vignette, and then everybody else was sketching, and I was, you know, getting around to see who needed help or checking on how all the participants in the workshop were going. So I didn't get to sketch much there on site, just this one and this. Oh, and the daylily as well was on site there. And then on the plane on the way home, I left a couple of pages here because I knew I wanted to add more sketches of Dino's. So on the plane on the way home, I did this little interior sketch looking up the timber table with the kitchen in the background. I loved this row of saucepans that they had hanging from the ceiling, and a couple of vases caught my eye on the table. So that had been a really appealing scene for me at Dino's. All around the property were little odds and ends, so baskets filled with pumpkins. I'd found this really interesting. It was more for me, I wanted to paint the palm trees up above the roof line, so hence building that building scene around the basket. So I'd done the basket first and then the building up against it. And my perspective's a little bit off. I'm a little bit perspectively challenged. It's no secret. This page we had a visit to Music Valley, and this lovely lady Jane had talked to us about the history of the island, the language, you know, the property where she lived and its history, which was just incredible. And she had all of these, you know, old wares, I guess, and eggs and baskets of eggs, and she's very good at weaving and teaches weaving workshops and making string or rope from, you know, like hibiscus bark and all sorts of barks and plant materials. So while she was talking, I was drawing these little sketches of things that were around the room, around the shed that we were sitting in. So, you know, some of them are a little bit out of proportion, or they're not perfect because they're just direct in with a Twisby fountain pen. I had pre-prepared these little squares earlier. I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but I had just put a little bit of raw sienna or yellow ochre down as a pre-prepared page, so that if it fit something, gave me a little bit of an idea of doing something differently to normal, then I would have that page. And it just worked out perfectly I think I was skipping pages like I mentioned, then I came to that and I thought that's perfect. Then we sketched around the garden for a little bit after we'd had lunch on site and a tour of the garden. So I was trying to just, these sketches I think were all direct, no pencil. Oh, this one I used some pencil, and the boat I had drawn in before we started the session, so I had done that outside before people arrived. So these were all just working direct with watercolour, not worrying about pencil and accuracy, but just putting the paint down. And then a couple more on site. This one I did afterwards when I got home. I just loved my little piece of paper towel that I was wiping my brush on while I was doing these florals, and so I had kept that in my painting bag and I've stuck it in there. It probably seems a bit silly. These little birds, I noticed when you're sketching, often you're absorbed in what you're doing, and I was sketching this plant, and it took me a little while to kind of register that the sound of the birds was just literally behind the plant. There was a pawpaw tree, and so the birds were coming in, they'd opened up the bottom of the pawpaw tree, and so they literally half the time were up inside the pawpaw. They'd be on the top of it, all kind of waiting their turn. They'd flit in and out, they'd be on the branches. So I was quite fascinated for a while. I stopped and just photographed and watched them come and go from that fruit that they'd opened up. They didn't start eating any of the others, they just were coming and going from this one that they had opened up the bottom of. So these now are all since coming back home from this stage here. So I've been playing a little bit in the evenings with some water-soluble graphite pencils, which I really like, these art graph ones. And so again, these are some of the things around the Music Valley property. These were whale bird eggs in a timber bowl, timber vessel of some kind. This was a timber plate that got handed around with Jane's hand-woven strings on it, and a basket that had been woven. The only downside of the water-soluble graphite is it does transfer a little bit from page to page, so I can see my page is a bit dirty up here. And I tend to, every time I open the sketchbook, I'll just erase a little bit of that. You can see it again here. So this is playing with the same markers, the same pencils, sorry. And so a little sketch study that I did before I was doing a large painting as a little tonal sketch. And then I continued it on and did the same day when the waves were so big. There was a father and two boys out on the pier, and I had taken some photos there, trying to capture the size of the waves, but the angle wasn't great to get the really large waves in the photo. I was fascinated by this toilet block down at Emily Bay and around Norfolk Island. They have these green toilet blocks, and they just, I think with the pine trees, they just feel a little bit like it could be Norway or a Scandinavian country, Finland perhaps even. And so I had drawn that and painted it quite a few times. So they were little tonal sketches again with the water-soluble graphite. We painted this view, quite close to this view, on one of our paint-out days. My painting didn't have this boat in it from the angle I was on, and so this is one I've done since from home. And these coloured pencil works are generally just a mechanical pencil with coloured inks or coloured leads that I had bought a while ago, and I'm really enjoying working with those and the look of a colour pencil sketch. They're just a little bit easier than some colour pencils in that they're always sharp, so you don't have to keep sharpening the pencil. You've always got that harder lead like you have with a mechanical pencil. The leads come in little sets of colours, I think. And that's all I've done on that book, but I've still got just under half of my sketchbook to fill. So I will keep going with some more Norfolk Island sketches, because otherwise I feel like what do you put at the back? I'd love to hear whether you just keep going, now I'm home, is this the sketchbook I should take out and paint, on site around the coast, or do you tend to keep it with a theme if that's how you started and then just not finish it? So I have other sketchbooks from trips where I just haven't finished the back of the sketchbook. I've left it at the end of the trip, but I do feel like it's a waste of beautiful paper. So I think my nightly sketches will continue in here, and I'll pick Norfolk themes, but I'd love to hear from you what you do. And thanks. If you've got any questions, just let me know in the comments. Talk to you soon. Bye.